Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I am Paul McCarthy, President of the Automotive Aftermarket Suppliers Association, the Aftermarket division of MEMA. We are coming to you live from the broadcast studio at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. We launched this MEMA Policy Breakfast series in 2017, but today we are using, for the first time, this online format in order to reach national media. So we welcome your feedback on it. Today we will look in an in-depth way into the emerging issues surrounding the data that your car is collecting and who has access to it. Many consumers and legislators do not even know that their cars are collecting their important data. Data that belongs to consumers and data that service shops need to complete maintenance and repairs. This is important because if access to data and consumers' ownership of their data is limited, households across America will not be able to have the family car repaired at their local garage. This will impact the affordability, convenience, and safety of auto repair. It will eliminate the competitive market for vehicle service that has served consumers well for over a century. The cost of repairs will increase. Even more concerning, families may put off or even avoid making necessary repairs to keep their cars safe. This issue also matters because of American principles that we hold dear, like free and competitive markets and consumers' freedom to choose. So today, we will look at this growing problem and explore how to best make sure consumers retain choice on where and with what parts their vehicles repaired. So let me introduce today's panelists. Chris Blalock is an expert from one of our member companies. He serves as the Director of Product Development and Management for Dorman. Bill Hanvey is President and COO of the Automakers Association, with whom we've partnered on this issue. And finally, we have Ann Wilson, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for MEMA, and Ann will be our moderator today. Ann?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for watching today. We will jump right into the discussion in a minute. After our panel, we will take questions from viewers, so if you would like to ask a question, please use the question feature within the webcast platform. You can enter those questions at any time during the panel, and we will do our best to address them all at the end. So let's start right into the questions and get our opinions from our whole panelists. Paul, let's start with you. Why is this issue so important for us to understand?
Simply put, because of the sheer impact on consumers. Consumers this year will spend $305 billion repairing and maintaining their cars and trucks. So for most Americans, this is the second most valuable purchase, their vehicle. And for the 35% of Americans who don't own their own home, which is many of the less fortunate, it's their most expensive. This is how 85% of Americans get to work. And we know what the impact will be if we allow a monopoly to happen on this. Based on repair cost comparisons, it'll take over $100 billion out of consumers' pockets. The average vehicle age in the US is 12 years old. So we need to have these safe, affordable repair options for consumers. So take a single mom, drives an average 12-year-old vehicle, uses it to get to work, take her kids to practice, go to church. She and many other Americans like her simply cannot afford to have this money taken out of her pocketbook.
So Chris, let's drill down into the kind of data we're talking about first. So what kind of data is it, and exactly what impact is it having on consumers right now?
Well, there's two issues, two types of data that we need to focus on. One is the data that your car is creating while you use it. Where you drive to, how fast do you drive tired, do you stay in your lane, do you stop at McDonald's or Burger King, and how often do you go there? That data is collected, it's used, it's sold in order to influence your buying habits. We don't think of it that much because we use our car to drive, not to perform computer functions or as a phone. The second type of data that we're concerned with is the operating system that the car comes with, essentially the operating system. When you buy the car owner should have an explicit right to access and use that software in order to maintain that vehicle over the course of the life of it. And those two, the first type of data is we're somewhat oblivious to it as consumers.
So Bill, let's talk about this data and exactly how it affects a consumer on a day-to-day basis.
Sure.
In some ways it seems like a very technical issue that people can't get their arms around, but it's not an obscure issue. It's happening right now. How is this impacting consumers directly right now, and how will it affect them in the future?
Sure, it is affecting the consumer now, and it will exponentially increase the consumer more and more as the vehicles become more technological. And as Paul mentioned before, it really all comes down to choice. And what I like to do is give a real world example or an analogy to say that if you had a sinus infection, for example, you go see your NP or you go see your doctor, you get a prescription, you're in and out. Just imagine that if you had that same sinus infection and that you were forced to go to an ENT. It would be more expensive, and the time to be able to see that doctor would be months or weeks, if not months out. The same would be true as if the consumer was forced to have their vehicles repaired at the car dealership. So it's found that 70% of the repairs are made in the independent market at the garage on the corner of Elm and Main. Taking that choice away would lead to at least a 30% increase, as Paul had mentioned earlier, in the cost of repair, not to mention the inconvenience of having to schedule that so far out.
Well, and for many Americans too, their dealership is not, as readily available to them. As we realize, people buy cars in different ways now, and their dealership may not be on their way to daycare or on their way to work or someplace like that.
Yep, very true. And especially for our consumers in rural areas where, if they were forced to go to the dealership, it may be 50, 60 miles out, and that's a very much of an inconvenience.
And remember, this is how they get to work.
That's right.
If they can't get to work the next day, this is how America
Right.
runs. This is how we have gainful employment.
Well, working with the independent repair shops on a regular basis, I would like to say that most of them are actually ENTs.
That's very true. That's a great point.
So
They just didn't get that expensive degree.
what we don't realize is when we sit in the driver's seat of our car is you could imagine ones and zeros floating around you. It's what's happening. The modules are talking to each other. We just don't realize it. We will actually put it up on a screen so visitors can see it, and it's like, oh, that's what's going on?
Right. So we've done some consumer research in terms of their knowledge in terms of their vehicle transmitting data. More than 3/4 of the consumers that we surveyed were unaware that their vehicles were transmitting data. And when they did find out that they were transmitting data, they wanted to be able to control who had access to that data and where it was going.
So we've already talked about a little bit about consumers maybe not understanding the data. Do you think that lawmakers, regulators really understand where we are at a crossroads in this industry and what that really means for their constituents and consumers?
I don't think they do, and the reason it's so concerning is because it's upon us now. It's not something that's coming 3 or 5 years from now. We deal with it on a daily basis now.
The feedback that we get when we talk about this to legislators, we talk about it to consumers, it's disbelief. It's, I can't believe that this is happening. I can't believe that I don't own the data. And I can't believe that, I go out a couple of years and I'm not going to be able to take my vehicle to the shop. I can't go to Donna's garage that I've been taking my vehicle to for 10, 15 years, and that this is going to be closed to me. So that's why we're doing activities like this, is to try to educate consumers and legislators. And we encourage them to learn more and to go to the Your Car, Your Data, Your Choice website that we have to learn more, to educate and understand how and what this means for them.
Paul, if I can build up on the example you gave in the beginning of the 12-year-old 2007, 2008 vehicle that a single parent is using to take the kids to school, or the senior citizen on a fixed income, and all of a sudden the ABS light comes on. I'm not sure how many people learn to drive a car being told to pump the brakes. Okay, nowadays we don't do that because this does it for you. It does it much faster than a human can. But that ABS light comes on, I can either replace it, have it repaired, or I can choose to ignore it. it's a $1,500 repair. It can be a $2,500 repair at the NT.
Right.
And to limit that option to someone who's on a fixed income is it's going to put other drivers and themselves at risk, because instead of having it repaired, they might choose to pretend it's not on.
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about those consumers though. So let's play this out. So I'm going to use my daughter-in-law. Very careful consumer. She's very careful with her money. Bought a car with cash, you know, and so she takes it to go get it repaired, and she takes it to where her father's always told her to go. What happens? Is it the cost, or are they even going to be able to diagnose that problem? What is that going to mean to a consumer? What does it mean now, and then how is that going to play that out in the next few years?
Well, I think an important part of what we're asking for is we're not trying to limit, we're trying to expand where people can go. In other words, you have the choice to go to the OE dealership. You should have the choice to go to an independent shop where your daughter's father has told her to go. But today, and yes, it is a significant cost difference. I think we already mentioned that typically the aftermarket replacement parts are going to save the consumer about 30%. It is going to become an issue of, can that independent repair facility talk to the car? Can it read? That potential is there, because simply by changing a few lines of code, the OEM can restrict what we see.
Right. Today's vehicles generate 25 gig of data an hour. And just to wrap your heads around that, that's an amazing statistic. And you know, we have to be able to access, the consumer has to be able to dictate where that data goes.
And let's talk about the impacts it's having now, because Chris said that well. There's already over 100 million vehicles on the road, by the estimate of one of our members, that has some kind of repair constraint as a result of these technological issues. And many of those constraints right now are fairly small. You may only see it if you get in a collision or if you have an advanced driver assist system. But over the next few years, the number of vehicles affected by this, the repair constraints, is going to explode. And that's the issue. And so one of the analogies we use is, this is kind of a time bomb. We hear the ticking now, but when the bomb explodes is Chris's example. This is 5 or 6 years down the road. Maybe it's the second owner, a single mom or dad, maybe a student, who goes and tries to get their vehicle repaired and finds that they can't because of these constraints that have been made. They are looking for a safe, affordable option, and it's not out there. And so they may find that their vehicle is worth a lot less money. It'll certainly cost them more, and it may be a long time till they can get that vehicle repaired, which makes it hard to go to work, hard to drop off the kids. We know this is coming. We understand what the impact is, and so that we will, if we don't take action now, we will regret this, and we will regret this soon. And so for consumers, we need to take action.
You make an important point that I want to emphasize, and that's who this affects. 265 million cars on the road, average age 11.8 years. The ones that are most affected by this are the cars that are 4 or 5 years and older.
So, but as we talk about these constraints, we all think about this as our phones. We all think we understand our phones. I will admit I don't, but we all think we understand our phones. So when we talk about, Chris and Bill, help me a little bit, the software that's there. You talked about how much information is generated in a vehicle per hour. Will we be able to reprogram the software when it becomes a crisis? Or do we need to address this now? Is this not something that we're going to be able to fix once that software is out there?
Well, the reality is that as a consumer, as a car owner, we're not able to do that. It's a level of complexity that we depend on the aftermarket to do that for us. And there are very capable, very credible suppliers out there that provide that service for us and make the part available. Talking about the phones, I rely on my son to get me through my phone. And that 25 gigabytes of data, it's fair today to ask the question, it's 3 a.m., do you know what your iPhone is doing? Our car is a megaphone. It's sitting in the garage, and when it's sitting there, it can literally be talking to the OEM and transmitting data and being updated.
And I think an important point too is that our industry has always not only risen to the occasion on technology, but in many cases has advanced technology. So we are able to through Chris and his company and the local shop owner, we're able to identify problematic parts and not only diagnose them, but improve upon that. And I think that that's something that is discounted in terms of us being able to access the data and so forth. We're really a very good early warning indicator for failure-prone parts. How do we engineer it differently? How do we engineer it better? So to keep us out of the loop is really kind of preventing the progress in terms of technological development with the vehicle.
And that's a great point, because if we don't maintain a competitive market for this, consumers will lose out on the innovation that Bill is talking about. And this innovation helps consumers in real ways, financial ways, and in operations of their vehicle.
Well, a good example of that innovation, if I may, talking about your daughter going to the parts store to get a replacement key fob, if I may.
We've all been there.
So the innovation, you lose it, you misplace it, whatever, it's not working. She buys that. She then has to go down the road and pay another $80 to have that programmed to her vehicle. The aftermarket came up with a solution where it comes with this disposable tool that you plug it in briefly to program it, and you avoid that second trip to another facility. You save that $80. That's innovation that comes from it. We talk a lot about cost, and I get that. But it's not just cost. We have the benefit. It's not that we're better, but we have the benefit of the field failures. We've seen how this thing is failing, and you're right. Many times we can design in an improvement.
Absolutely.
It's about convenience and choice. I'd also throw out one aspect, because this raises it. What we're asking for when we ask for this access to data is nothing more than what we've long had as an industry. We are just asking for the data and information that we need to continue to repair and maintain vehicles safely. So this isn't something new, it's just that technology has created the opportunity for new barriers, new constraints to trade. And we do believe that consumers and our industry is best served if there is safe, affordable mobility for all consumers.
A good way to put that into perspective with everybody's familiar with smartphones. Your smartphone would have a lot less value to you if you couldn't have all the third-party apps on it. But the only reason that you can have those third-party apps is because Apple creates an API so that developers can...
An API would be?
I don't know what the acronym stands for.
Well, ask your son.
But yes, exactly. So it allows the developers to interact with the tool. Likewise, we need that so the aftermarket parts that we design and manufacture can operate. Case in point, you're driving the car, and an over-the-air update, which is how cars are going to be updated in the future. It's going to be sent over, and it may, in addition to the system update, it may query the modules that are on the network and say, hey, climate control module, are you there? Are you working? Do you have any trouble codes? A replacement part, if we don't know how to interoperate with that over-the-air update, we're not going to know what answer to give because we don't know what the question is. As such, it may set a false code in the vehicle, and it may send your daughter to the shop to get a module replaced that doesn't need to be replaced. It just didn't know how to answer the question.
And I think we also need to talk about safety here too. You know, we talk about, the convenience of vehicles and how we all depend on them, but we also depend on them to be safely functioning. And with a lot of the new electronics and new safety devices, pre-crash technology in vehicles, we get more and more data that comes out of the vehicle. But what concerns me is if people don't maintain those devices, but you think you understand what happens to a blind spot detection, but you don't maintain it, all of a sudden you have come dependent on a device that is no longer operable in your vehicle. I know, Paul, we've done a lot of work in the past on non-perform maintenance. And do we see this with the cost of unperformed maintenance, non-performed maintenance increasing?
Well, that's the big concern. If this decreased convenience, this increased cost, this monopoly effect, if it leads consumers to postpone a repair that they need to keep their vehicles safe, we'll all regret it as an industry. We know sooner or later we're going to have to come together and figure out how to make this work for consumers. We don't want it to be the cause that there's accidents, that there's tragedies that happen because of the result of this. we need to get ahead of this and be proactive and have the regulation, have the legislation to prevent exactly that. Because we've seen it.
To put it on the table, those are the two arguments that are being used, safety and cybersecurity, that are most frequently used to try to lock out the aftermarket. And the fact of the matter is for decades, the aftermarket has lived up to those requirements.
Well, and it's not even locking out the aftermarket, it's also locking out the consumer. It's locking out the person who put their money down to buy that vehicle, who depends on it every day.
And let's go ahead, Bill.
Well, and in fact, we have proposed a cyber secure solution that enables direct bi-directional communication with the vehicle to the OEMs, that communicates with the intelligent transport system, which is coming, and is going to be critical for the next generation of transportation. And in actuality, it's a more effective means of communication. So, we, as Chris said, we're on it, we're ahead of it, and we understand the implications of data access. Let's make no mistake about that. But we have a proposed solution on the table, and we would like to continue our dialogue with that.
And if I can add a little context to that, our members develop a lot of that technology.
Absolutely.
Whether you get it at the dealer, whether you get it in the replacement market. And they've made clear that this is not, you can have both cybersecurity and repairability. These are not mutually exclusive goals. To give a little bit of context, we as an industry have been dealing with repairing electronics and software and complicated safety systems for decades. We have been dealing with secure private information, like key codes, as an industry, and cooperatively with the automakers for decades. So there's clearly ways that we can solve this, that we can come together, we can get privacy, we can get cybersecurity, we can get repairability, and we can ensure safety for American consumers.
Well, our demise was going from carburetor to electronic fuel injection. Oh, you'll never be able to handle it. Or, hey, we're going from a crank window to an electric window. Well, guess what? We have always met, as I said earlier, the technological challenge, and in fact have advanced them.
So let's talk a little bit about the discussions with vehicle manufacturers and automakers.
Sure.
Has the industry approached them? What's the discussion been like? And what really are the challenges and hurdles that consumers in the aftermarket and legislators need to look at as we try to bring these parties together to get a better future for car owners?
Sure.
Well, there is already a clearinghouse, if you would. There is cooperation that takes place. I would interject my own opinion and observation and experience that I don't think they're going to come to the table willingly. It was Massachusetts putting it on the ballot and it passing by 87% that brought them to the table with the right to repair MOU. And so I wish I could say they would come willingly. But there's a clearinghouse that already helps the tool makers, scan tools, I'm talking electronic tools, get the information that they need from the OEMs. There are mechanisms in place. They need to be expanded upon.
And it was interesting, Mary Barra just this week had an article that I saw on LinkedIn that the consumer owns the data. So we'd like to have that discussion with Mary and her team in terms of exactly how does the consumer own the data, and how can we put that data back in the hands of the consumer. And that's not to say that we have not been talking to the car makers, and we have. And as I said, their main concerns were cybersecurity. We felt as if we have a very good solution, not only for individual car makes, but as the entire community, in terms of developing a standardized system to be able to do that. Just like the ATM system. So you establish a credibility with the ATM, and you're able to use different ATMs with a different card throughout the country. And it's really kind of similar in terms of the security that we put in place that would be similar to this. So
I'd like to point out that it's not so much of an us and them in reality.
Right.
It is more of a symbiotic relationship.
Yep.
In the first 3 years of a vehicle's life, it's under warranty. We don't try to, nobody's going to go and pay for a repair when you can get it done under warranty.
Correct.
Conversely, the OEMs, when a car becomes 6, 7 years old, they don't really want to keep making those parts for that car. and the average age of a car is 11.8 years.
That's average.
That's
And
average.
that's
It's a lot
average.
older.
And,
Right.
and so they're not after that. Where we really compete is in the 4, 5, and maybe 6 year frame is where we're competing. The rest of it, it's more cooperative and beneficial.
And because of that, as Chris mentions, we retain hope that we'll be able to come together and solve this and look at it from working from the consumer backwards. Because if we think about protecting resale values of vehicles, we think about protecting brand image, we think about safety, this will require consumers to have choice.
Right.
There's simply not enough capacity in the automaker system to repair these vehicles. So we do retain hope that we'll come together, we'll look at it from the consumer backwards, and we'll have a solution. And again, we can have repairability and we can have cybersecurity, as Bill mentioned.
Sure.
Bill's teams have been working hard on the technology. Together we've been thinking about the governance of that and
Right.
how to ensure that security, ensure that privacy and that safety.
Well, and when you talked about capacity, we're talking about bays. So you're talking about service bays. So, you know, are there enough service bays out there in the dealerships to get, you know, our cars repaired?
Couldn't absorb it.
Well, there's, so just for context, there's 235,000 independent repair shops in the USA, and there is about 16,000 dealerships. So just to put that in context. So
And
that-
across the car manufacturers, it runs a continuum of who's most cooperative, who's least cooperative, and the one that is most like an Apple iPhone out there that constrains it the most. I'm not going to talk names here, but I was on their website this morning just looking about the capacity issue. There are 10 states that only have one service dealer in the entire state. In the entire state. There are 21 states that have no dealer for that car manufacturer. None. Nada. Zero. Zilch. Where are you going to go get it fixed?
Right.
Yeah.
And you know what? And this also affects the dealerships as well. So if you have a Toyota and you want to, and you like your Ford service dealer and want to bring it to Ford, this restriction of data also affects the dealerships too. And a very good business model for the dealerships are used car sales or trade-ins. In order for them to be able to fix an opposing brand, they're in the same situation. So-
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Many of them want to be all make.
Of course.
In the repair.
Right.
So the industry, the aftermarket industry, the industry we all represent, is trying to get this information out. Paul, Bill, can you talk a little bit about some of the forward-leaning programs that we have to try to make sure that consumers understand what's at stake so that we can get a sense of urgency so we don't get to the point where it's too late to put the genie back in the bottle?
Sure.
Bill, you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, last week, AASA and the Auto Care Association announced a joint venture for an education campaign for the consumer and for our industry to make everyone aware of the issues and how they could take action. And that is yourcaryourdata.org. We are going to be advertising it extensively to the consumer and to our industry to make sure that A, everyone is aware of the implications of data restriction, and B, that choice is being challenged right now.
Yeah, well said. And so if you do have concerns, if you want to be more educated, we encourage media folks, we'd encourage legislators, we encourage consumers, go to that website and your car, your data, your choice. Get educated, learn more. And if you do have concerns about that you believe that you should own that data, if you believe that you should be able to repair this vehicle and have choice in that repair, we encourage you to sign the petition that is there and raise that issue so that legislators know that this matters to you.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think this is, the ability for consumers to understand what's at stake, but also for the lawmakers and regulators to realize this is something that they're not going to be able to address when it becomes a crisis. Then it will be too late. So your ticking time bomb is exactly the analogy that we need to talk about. So we have started getting some questions in, so let's move to those. Thank you all for this really informative conversation. I think it's been very helpful. I think it's a good way to level set the discussions and how we move forward. So let's talk a little bit about questions that we've had coming in from the audience. Bill, consumers thinking about buying a new car. They're going to go this weekend and go start, quote unquote, kicking the tires on buying a new car. What do they need to talk about? What do they need to do?
Well, that's a great question. As I said, 3/4 of the consumers are unaware their vehicle's transmitting data, where it goes, who gets it, is it for sale. So when you are about to ink that contract at the dealership, what we would recommend is you look for that data, just like when you're signing up for an app. You sign that little terms and conditions about data security and where the data goes. We suggest that when you get to that terms in the terms of sale, that if you can find it, then it's a matter of when you are across from that individual trying to sell you the car, ask them those hard questions. Where does my data go? Who's in control of my data? Will this allow me to have my data to be able to service at an independent repair facility? What are you doing with the data? How much is it? Do I control it? So the consumer has to take an active role in this and actively look for it because it's not being mentioned at the point of sale.
And like you said, everybody's faced with a pile of papers, and all you really want to do is get out of the dealership and get in your new car.
And no one reads the terms of sale.
Haven't looked at some of them.
Right.
I don't either, but because of these issues I have.
Yes.
And explicitly stated there that we may access your vehicle's GPS in order to locate your vehicle. Scratch that line out and see what happens.
And if you end up still having to sign that in order to actually walk away with the vehicle, you might also want to get online and sign the petition at the same time, so that when you purchase your next vehicle, or maybe when your vehicle's out of warranty, you can have options.
Yep.
You can take it back to the dealer, but you can also take it somewhere else if you want. And we have a little bit of credibility talking about this. We represent suppliers, the manufacturers of those parts. So whether you buy it at the dealer, you buy it somewhere else, it's our parts. And we're fine with you choosing and going to wherever you choose. But we do believe that that choice is important and that consumers in our industry are best served, and all of us in the industry are better served with affordable mobility that grows the market for everyone.
Right.
So one of the questions we've gotten from the audience is, could you expand a little bit more on why vehicle manufacturers would not share the data with third parties?
Because they want to monetize it.
So explain this to me. I mean, this whole idea of whether I go to Burger King or Kentucky Fried Chicken kind of scares me.
I've got a friend that his wife swears that Apple listens to their conversations because they'll be talking about something, and all of a sudden, the next time she goes online, there it pops up. And I don't believe that Apple's listening in that regard, but it's just that the algorithms are so good, they're so fine-tuned, and things that we think nothing about will fit into an algorithm, and it will influence your purchasing decision.
And go ahead, Bill.
Well, the Ford CEO announced at one, I believe at CES, was that the #1 revenue opportunity for Ford Motor Company was data, more so than new car sales. So, to Chris's point, it is and the car makers don't know what to do with it. They're receiving so much data. So it is an absolute revenue opportunity that is being made unaware to the consumer that data is being sold.
So I mean, the car can tell you where you've been, where
How
you
much you
shop,
weigh.
how much you weigh.
Yeah.
Like you said, do you drive fast? Do you stop really quickly? Things like that. Things that we don't even think about. We think about it now with Facebook and other, online services, but we don't think about it with our car.
No. But your car probably has more data than is coming off your phone. So
it's not just, but it's a data issue as far as access to parts and repair, but it's also a privacy issue and an issue of what happens to that data. And that's the issue we think that the vehicle
important,
manufacturers can monetize that data.
Right.
It's important to call out that there are two issues. One
That's
is the
exactly
data that
right.
we generate,
Yeah.
and the other is for the aftermarket to be able to interoperate with the vehicle.
Right.
And we understand the appeal, the Wall Street appeal, to say, hey, we're a data play right now that leads to outsized multiples. But in the end, we as consumers own this data, and we're letting others use it, and that's fine. Let consumers choose who they allow to use
Correct.
that data.
Right.
And
Some
in
consumers
addition,
may be fine with that.
it's fascinating the different stories we hear when we talk with folks who are deep in the automakers, the folks who are trying to figure out how these vehicles of the future get serviced, the engineers developing this. They say, we know we need you. We need to have this choice. We need to have other places that people can repair their vehicles because we don't have the capacity. We don't have the ability to repair all these vehicles. We know that you can repair all these vehicles. So it really is a funny issue. and that there's a little bit of a Wall Street draw versus kind of the reality. And sooner or later, we're going to have to come together and do what's right for consumers. Right.
So 2 questions I'm going to try to pull together. Do most of our local repair shops know about these problems? And are there any specific parts right now that are being affected? I think you've mentioned a few, but right now, if you're having a certain specific kind of problem, you're going to see more of this. And then looking around the corner, what's the future bring?
It is definitely real today. There are, many of us grew up at a time where we could, we could buy the OEM part, we could buy a replacement part, we could go to a salvage yard and get one off of a light car and put it on. Today, many modules are being programmed with the VIN, the vehicle identification number, programmed into it. And in essence, if it doesn't have that same, if you put that part off of one car onto another same year, make, and model, it will check for that VIN, and the VIN is not right, and it won't run.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that do to those folks who, do their own repair? Is that becoming a lost art?
It's not just them. It's the salvage industry is a huge business in itself, and it affects parts that they sell, transmissions that are, the control module will no longer do what I just described, and that part has no value until the aftermarket companies come along and develop the way to go into that and erase that VIN and allow it to be programmed with the proper VIN.
Yeah.
And to put that in context, the part that is now the car saying, no, you can't use this part, we won't run if you have this part, it may be made by the exact same person who made the part originally. It may be even a better part that the replacement industry has come up with to fix a problem that was in the original part, but it still can't work, and consumers can't put it in. And as the FTC recently held a hearing on this, and as they concluded, this isn't an issue about whether these vehicles will be repaired. We have the technology, the capability to do this. It's who gets to do it. So this is a perfect example of those restraints of trade. This isn't about having a safe quality part. This is about, am I the one who gets to control this and have that monopoly?
And how about the local repair shop, Bill? Are they all aware of this, or are they seeing this just as another hurdle? I mean,
they are aware of this issue. However, in many cases, they don't know where to turn for help.
That's when they tell the consumer, you have to go to the dealership.
Yeah, and so that's why we're here, and that's why we are doing the education campaign to give the shops a home for specific examples of where they're being shut out of data, so that we can in turn package that up and give real-life example to legislators throughout the country.
And repair shops are not an insignificant number of employees in this country. I mean, we all think about the people we count on every day, but they're in every community throughout this country.
There are 900,000 technicians in the U.S., independent repair technicians in the U.S. today. That's 900, and there's not enough. Very good. And those are 900,000 jobs. Those are 900,000 taxpayers and 900,000 voters. So that's an important point to make too. And 235,000 shops. It's just, and as an industry as a whole, we employ 4.6 million people.
And that just speaks to the importance of this. A lot of those folks are small business people, the types of businesses we're trying to encourage. So the economic impact is huge. And this, well, I'll leave it there. The economic.
We all need to come to the table on it, because as I indicated earlier, the OEMs, they run the full spectrum of cooperating or not cooperating. You mentioned about the Ford. Last November, the CEO of Volvo told Bloomberg that they will continue to make money by designing and selling good, attractive cars, that they were not going to get into the data selling business. So it runs the spectrum, but we as an industry can't afford to negotiate with each manufacturer. We all need to come to the table, including our legislators.
Well, and then also from a consumer perspective, it's hard enough to know when you go into a car the features that are in there, but the features of what you might be going on with the data, that's more than most consumers are willing to do on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon when they're looking at a new car.
Not just features, but functions. And if we're talking about safety, and if the OEMs are truly concerned about safety, which
Which
they
they are.
They want us as an aftermarket company to understand what the functions and features are. Today, we don't get that information. And the fact that when you hit a wall at 20 miles an hour, your windows drop down a little bit so that when the airbag goes off, it doesn't bust your eardrums because you just increased cabin pressure. That's something, how do we know to design that feature in? And fortunately, we're pretty good at what we do, but it could be more effective.
So
more efficient.
Let's talk about sort of this regulatory, legislative place we are. Paul, you mentioned the FTC. We've all mentioned, you mentioned Massachusetts. We've mentioned Congress. So what are the actions going on both in Massachusetts and here in Washington? What do we see happening out of the regulatory front? And then the big question, do we see Congress acting on this?
Well, why don't I take the Massachusetts question first? So in 2013, we passed the Right to Repair Act in Massachusetts, which guaranteed equal accessibility to data as the car dealers. But the accessibility to that data was at that little port underneath the steering wheel called the OBD2 port. Now that vehicles are becoming wirelessly transmitting that data, we're going back in Massachusetts for an addendum to the Right to Repair Act to have that cover wirelessly transmitted data. So we have a ballot initiative that we're working on as well as legislation. So it's moving along, and as Chris mentioned earlier, that was the single largest ballot referendum that passed in Massachusetts by 86% of the consumers.
Paul, and then you mentioned the FTC.
The FTC, we've had conversations with the Federal Trade Commission about this concern about retaining a competitive market for these types of repairs, which will protect consumers and allow consumer choice. I'd also throw out in Europe, they've already looked at this and they've decided that this will result in monopoly power, and they're already moving to regulate this. So we're behind. So we're talking with the FTC. We have legislation that is being proposed to provide some access to data at the federal level, and there's more actions that'll be necessary. But for better or for worse, the industry's come to the conclusion that we do need legislators to act. We do need regulators to act, and they need to act now. We talked about earlier, this is a ticking time bomb. There are repair constraints now. We can't wait until this is 5 or 6 years down the road and that second owner finds that they can't get this vehicle repaired, that their resale value is being impacted because of the things that are happening now. So we need action, and we need action urgently. If we don't make a difference now, we'll look back on this. There'll be safety issues, there'll be consumer issues, and we'll regret that we didn't take action.
Bill, I like to think of it as Right to Repair version 2.0.
Exactly.
Because 2014, 2013, it addressed access to a lot of stuff. It did not necessarily, the more software is coming into play, it didn't address the part side of it, and that there is a replacement part that can be sold. And hopefully we can get that into 2.0.
So before we conclude, any last thoughts that any of you have that you'd like to make sure that everybody understands?
I think the whole privacy and control point is critical in terms of the data privacy, the data that's being sold versus access and control. And the consumer should be in control of both, in terms of what's being sold, who's selling it, who's buying it. And importantly for our industry, obviously, is the ability to be able to access that data cyber securely so that we can diagnose, fix, and get the consumers on their way.
Paul?
Well, I think it comes back to the principles that we're talking about. We're just asking to have something that has served consumers so well for over a century, which is that continued ability to have access to the data and information to repair and maintain vehicles safely. And so it comes back to those principles. And all we're asking for is consumer choice, consumers to own their data, and a competitive market. And we do think that'll serve everybody in the industry well and lead to affordable mobility that will serve consumers and that'll help us all grow.
Great. Chris, anything else?
In some of our Hill discussions, the question came up about what has changed. The aftermarket has existed for decades. What's different? What's different is software. And software allows restrictions to be put in place easily that are that make it difficult and limit the consumer's ability to have choice. And the important point here is we're not asking, all we're asking is that the consumer continue to own the data and have an alternative.
You know, I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to get into their cars this evening and look at it in an entirely different way. So thank you, gentlemen. Yeah. Well, thank you all for this very informative discussion. Your insights have been invaluable. It's really been a lot of fun as we try to understand the implication of this issue. I would remind everyone to take a look at the website, yourcaryourdata.org. Take a look at the information there. Let us know if you've got questions. Sign the petition if you feel so inclined. This does conclude our panel today. Please feel free to contact any of us if you have additional questions or concerns. And we look forward to seeing you for our next policy panel later this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks.